Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. Appreciate SBG and Catapult having me on this. It's kind of weird, I guess, not seeing everyone. But yeah, listen, I think, what I discussed with the folks is really just kind of going through, our expansion journey. Nashville SC recently, in 2020 joined MLS. So I figured, going through kind of what that process looked like, just given how unique it is kind of in the global football landscape. And then going through, some of the things that, we prioritize, we emphasize in the beginning, some of the lessons we learned along the way, and then, some of the things that, we're kind of focusing on right now in year, towards the tail of year 2 and then moving on into year 3. So I figured I'd start with just a quick background. So I went to a small school in Ohio, played soccer there, ended up concentrating in a major on neuroscience, which got me very interested in decision making and how to use data and information to really kind of inform, humans and how they ultimately create beliefs and decisions, which I think, is very much kind of a part of this role in some ways. And then when I graduated, a friend told me about a company that was setting up, a data hub in New York named Opta, which I'm sure many, if not all of you, are familiar with. So I ended up being one of Opta's data analysts or data coders for a little bit, moved into their operations team, heading up, managing that data hub in New York. When Perform Group acquired Opta, I kind of jumped over into, the dark side of sales and the commercial side of the business, helping sell our data and data products to clubs and leagues, but also, some digital media groups and broadcast groups. And then from there ended up, heading up our business development in North America along a lot of those similar lines. And then found myself at Nashville SC. And so my current role is Director of Strategy and Analytics. I figured I'd kind of go through the two. They're very related, but I think have kind of different lenses, different focuses. So on the analytics side, I think, really the essence of it is how can we keep data, but also just generally the information that we collect as a club, as close as possible to all of our decision-making processes. And there are a few there, but certainly not limited to those. There's obviously, as you all very well know, a lot of decisions that a club makes every single day. So how can we, use information to make the best decisions as possible? And then on the strategy side, I think, a lot of it comes down to some of the longer term plans and initiatives we have as a club. How can we think through those things and not necessarily just think about, every single Saturday or Sunday, but obviously beyond and what's the club going to look like in 3 and 5 years and stuff like that. And like I said in the beginning, a lot of these things are related in my role, but also just the different departments I touch at the club. So I think it's been an interesting kind of 2 years trying to blend those two together at the club. So Nashville SC is a really young club, not just in MLS, but just wholly as a club. So Nashville FC was a fan-owned club that started in 2014. And then right around the 2016 period, the club made a bid to enter USL, which is kind of the second division here in the States, won that bid. And so started building a roster for that game in, shortly thereafter in the 2017 year. Which at the same time was when the club also, through an ownership group went through an MLS bid and ultimately won that kind of towards the tail of 2017, starting 2018. So, and then subsequently that roster build starting for the MLS team. So I think you had a lot of overlapping processes happening all at once, which was exciting, but obviously very, very quick growth for a club as a whole. And then I ultimately started in May of 2019, kind of in the middle of all of this, certainly with a focus and a role towards MLS, but still with touch points towards the existing USL team, which was an interesting process. And then, our inaugural game was February of 2020. Obviously it's been a tricky couple of years with the pandemic, but it's been good. And, we're excited. We have a new stadium opening in 2022 and a new training facility in 2023, which I'll hit on kind of on the last slide. So a few of just like the life stats, as you guys could see before, we've moved around quite a bit. So we've really had almost, I think, 5 offices and training facilities across that period, 3 home stadiums. There'll be 3 when we have our new stadium. And then, by the end of, this regular season, we'll have played 60 games. So I think, at the end of the day, this can be challenging in terms of, setting up fixed workflows, but I think it's allowed some trial and error as well, which I think has been good. We've been able to kind of figure out things at different facilities, different stadiums, and, ultimately really trying to figure out, what's going to work the best when we do get into our kind of forever home, so to say. So where did we start? So I think that the first key thing that I focused on, and that, I spoke to the club about when I first started, was, getting our structure right when it comes to kind of our analytics, our analysis department. So when I started, I reported to our general manager, which is basically the equivalent of a sporting director, with obviously a dotted line over into our head coach, and really working with both of them across some of the initiatives we discussed. And then, I pushed to really have both analysts report into me. I know that there's some structures where the video analyst will go directly into the head coach, but, I figured it'd be important for me to have kind of a direct line and a direct department with our video analyst to really kind of accelerate things forward. Obviously with, a dotted line at the end of the day, going into the head coach and our data analyst working with our general manager. So I think you see this very, nimble analysis department that as a core, we're able to drive things together. But, at the same time, each of us have our kind of respective dotted lines into different, senior leadership in order to bring some of the things that we've been working on to life. Right. And then I think one of the key things when it comes to kind of the data analysts and the anecdotes of, clubs taking data analysts, but just putting them in the corner. One of the big things that I tried to push was really getting our data analysts as involved as possible with the coaching staff and with the head coach in particular. And it's been good. It's been a process, but I think we've gotten pretty far in terms of that. And, I'm very fortunate to have not just a head coach that's very open-minded, but, a data analyst that's really able to kind of jump into some of those, can be uncomfortable water, to really kind of chat through some of the stuff with the coaches. I think some of the things we tried to drive was, sending our data analyst to preseason for 3 weeks in the first year to really just like have a work trip with the club. Trying to send him on away games at times. I think really just trying to treat him as another analyst rather than just kind of the data guy that just sits in the corner. The other one was really just kind of starting with the game, which sounds kind of cliche and fluffy, but, one of the things we first did with just sat down with them at a coffee shop with, hundreds of blank sheets of paper with a field diagram on it and a bunch of pens, and really just started kind of chatting through how they think about the game. Obviously with kind of like a game model of sorts in mind, but, just kind of like a quote unquote whiteboard session where we could just get all their ideas out on paper. And I think from there, once we had all of that, we took it internally and said, what are the types of things that we can translate into data? What's the next step for us to go back to those guys and say, listen, when we sat down and looked at X, Y, and Z, this is how we think we can measure it. The other one was low hanging fruit, and the guys make fun of me here for saying this so often, but it was very important, and I really truly believe that this is a key piece of the beginning stages, and still is really, because I think there's so much that you can do when it comes to data, information, analytics. I think what was key for us was to really focus on like simple, effective, immediately applicable pieces that we could kind of accomplish in the short term. I think a lot of that really comes down to just gaining that trust from the stakeholders, but also, trying to, create kind of a pitch for future investment down the road, right? Because I think as anyone knows, we're not nearly as, as resourceful as we'd love to be. So I think really trying to find some of those quick wins can help, push that along. So one of the things with scouting KPIs, which, I won't touch on a lot here, but I think that's one of the lowest hanging fruits in terms of us really trying to translate our player profiles into data points. Video metadata, which I'll talk about towards the end, but I think that's a huge one. And I think not necessarily a quote unquote analytics, but very powerful use of data. quality versus quantity, I think I had first written expected goals on this. I think expected goals is one concept where we can try to explain the difference between quality versus volume. But I think there's other things like, creating more of a robust kind of season table where we're not just taking in results, but looking at kind of underlying performance and how we can kind of explain that results, volume of shots, things like that are not necessarily the full picture. There's some underlying things that we can look at that maybe give us a better sense of what's going on. Roster management is a big one, especially in MLS with a lot of the cap rules, with which some of you may be familiar with. Tracking insights, the league struck a deal with Second Spectrum, and I think there's obviously a lot of sophistication when it comes to that data set, but I think we tried to focus on some of the basic pieces that we could introduce, obviously with the idea that some of these off the ball metrics can be, very tactically relevant to the coaches. And then visualizations, which is a big one, right? Not just kind of visualizing things on scatter plots or whatever it is, but trying to use the field as much as we can and how we can really, transcribe some of our data points onto a field, especially for the coaches. So along the way, some of the things that we learned, I think how we manage technology and our resources and the procurement of technology. And, coming from Opta, I was on one side of the seat in terms of selling products. So I think coming here, it was interesting to see how many different providers there really are. I had a sense of it, but I don't think I truly grasped it. So, I think being smart about it has helped us be nimble and kind of adjust here and there and pivot depending on what's going on. I think one of the big ones was contract terms, right? I think trying to negotiate the right deals was important to us. So committing to not just, term length, but the right volume of services, the right amount of licenses for us. I think there's a lot that we thought through that in terms of making sure it's the right kind of ladder as we grow as a club. I think, the illusion of the one-stop shop, I think, trying to potentially figure out, are there 2 or 3 or 4, of the right quote unquote shops for us to combine together, rather than, potentially trying to find kind of that unicorn that can do it all for us. And then the budget baseline, I think, was another big one in terms of, how can we build out a technology budget that, especially for a club that's pulling together an operations budget for the first time, how can we set a baseline for what we're looking at when it comes to, technology procurement, even just like analytics procurement, that will allow us to, build and grow with that. It's obviously a lot harder to ask for more and more money down the road. So I think trying to set that at something that's reasonable and, not just kind of throwing the kitchen sink at it, but something that is robust enough for us to really work with kind of in the long term. The other one was kind of this Nocode platform or ecosystem that's emerging. And to be fair, this was something I definitely learned kind of in this role and didn't have a good sense of it when I first came in, but there is quite a bit out there. And I think, we've discovered a couple different platforms, Airtable. I think there's Stacker, Data Wrapper is like a quick visualization tool. So, we looked at some of these no-code platforms to be able to, I think, get beyond like shared Google Sheets. I think there's, some of these offer a little bit more sophistication where you're able to still share rows and columns with one another at a club, but, can you start to build out different records and start to link things together in a bit more of a sophisticated way that I think allows you to kind of scale out a little bit quicker. Another one was kind of like showcasing what it would be if we did have an engineer. I think, as a club, we'd love to make the push to continue to grow out our analytics department. And I think some of these no-code platforms are very quick kind of band-aids to be able to show some of the stakeholders and, senior leadership to say, listen, we're doing this for cheap through third party, but, if we were to have something in-house, we could obviously replicate this plus some. And then the other thing that we learned was when you go through these, I think, being critical and careful about your data hygiene. Really, at the end of the day, you're kind of managing your own database. So I think there's a lot of responsibility that comes to that and kind of setting a very consistent and strong kind of schema at the beginning. And to be fair, this is something we're still kind of working through, and definitely haven't hit on this yet. The other one's beliefs and behaviors. And like I said, I think in the beginning, I think I'm always very interested in this stuff. I think it's very difficult to get people to just change their beliefs or behaviors, especially if they've been entrenched for very long. So I think, we thought about how we could really kind of augment people instead, kind of add to their existing beliefs and behaviors, obviously in order to kind of open their eyes to different ways of thinking about things, but, not trying to necessarily change them. I think like confidence, one of the things was, it's not easy to, it's not putting a fact on something doesn't necessarily get you into this like confidence that kind of the believer feels, right? Like if we just say something is a fact, it's not necessarily gonna win it over. So I think how can we really use our information in a way that creates confidence? And I think one of the things that helps with this is kind of admitting some of the limitations when it comes to the information we're giving. I think that actually helps build confidence rather than diminishes it. Digital and print. I love the digital world, but I think something I learned myself, I think is, we have to be conscious of, what's the most effective way to deliver information. And I think we've over time realized that even if we're killing a bunch of trees, being able to print reports, being able to put things on desks and be very powerful and a very effective way to actually get information to certain people. And then comfortable explanations. I think it's our duty to make, when we're explaining a model or a data point, to make it comfortable for the end user. I think sometimes this gets misconstrued, or we maybe expect a little bit too much from the person that's trying to interpret it. So, I think we really kind of drive that home in terms of using the same language, same vocab, as much as possible, using visuals to explain things. I think that this is a big one where it's on us to do as best we can to make it comfortable for the person using it. And then sequencing of information, I would argue, I think in some ways, the timing of when we deliver or distribute information is as important, if not more important than the actual information itself. So I think one of the things we tried to do was, as the story gets made across, let's just, a match day cycle, right? In terms of evaluating an opponent, how can we distribute information, before the story is developed, right? Obviously trying to mitigate some of the confirmation bias that anyone might have, but really getting it in and priming some of that, story development, I think is the best way for our information to actually get used at the end of the day. I think if we're late to the punch on this, I think stories are already developed and some of the objective information we're giving is just gonna, it's not gonna be used in the right way, not because people won't respect it, but I think because, the story's already been kind of developed in their head. And that's just how it works. And then, I think when it comes to kind of halftime at a game, showing video, showing data, how can we give a clear picture, even in a 45-minute span of, not just what happened in the last 10 minutes, but really what did that whole 45-minute period look like? Because obviously when you're in the emotions of the game, a lot of what you're looking at halftime can certainly be driven just by what most recently happened in the game. So some of the stuff that we're working on, and I'm trying to be mindful of time because I'd love to get to questions. So like I said in the beginning, I think video metadata was one of the biggest kind of quick wins and most powerful uses of data right at the start. When I first started here, the former video analyst was actually tagging corners and shots and free kicks live during a match. And as all of you guys know, certainly when you have event data available, you can really eliminate that step, pre and post match, but also kind of in a live environment as well. So I think that was the first thing. How can we alleviate some of that live workflow, live task by using event data to get at least that baseline of information when it comes to those tags. And then, certainly the emergence of tracking data has added another layer to this. We were excited with Second Spectrum coming on board with the league. And, I think, like I said, I think what folks are doing with tracking data is expansive, and there's a lot of sophistication there, but at the very simplest level, how can we use tracking data immediately? And I think it really comes to using it against video. So, how can we take what we've done with event data, with tracking data, to use, more tactically nuanced models to be able to more quickly and more efficiently organize our video to, create, different sections of, commonly looked at sequences or phases of play, again, to save time, but also to kind of add quality to some of the analysis we're doing. Obviously, SVG, as you guys know, are great at bringing these two together. And then custom models, I think this is something we're certainly very much at the beginning stages of. But, as we start to develop more bespoke, tactics and things that we want to look at, can we create our own models, and can we create our own, custom feeds, XMLs that we can potentially pump into, a video software or video system to be able to not just look at, the event or tracking data that, the output from there, but stuff that's very specific to Nashville SC. The big question and issue is, what do we do where we have limited data for matches, whether that's academy matches, friendlies, things like that. I think, tagging, we'll have an evolution of what it is, but I think as we get into more and more automation through data feeds, we have to be sure that we're still consistent with the tagging that we are doing. So I think it's a question that we're still working through. And then wearable data, obviously, with SVG and Catapult coming together, I think this will be a very interesting one. Right now, as with many clubs, we have two different kind of lines when it comes to training sessions. The sports science performance department with the wearables, and then, video analysis in terms of, using our drone to kind of film training sessions on a daily basis. So when it comes to performance, and the GPS they're collecting, a lot of their process comes down to, cutting up the GPS data and putting it into sections of the drills that occurred, right? Which is very similar to what the video analysts are doing. So is there a way for us to leverage what sports science is doing to actually help us and alleviate some time on the video side, right? So can we leverage, the drill library that performance has in order to, automate some of the tagging that we've been doing on the video side? And I think there's an inherent benefit in this, in that I think it brings consistency in terms of the language, where I think, we're certainly not, at a place where we have like a consistent library right now, or vocab where, analysts and performance are cutting exact drill. Really kind of help to kind of move forward in a very consistent way. Player IDs, player tags, this is an obvious one. And then, the physical output and the actual tactical behavior, right? So what's going on with the GPS? What are we reading? And then what are the tactical behaviors in training, but also how can we kind of parallel that with matches themselves? What does it look like when we're pressing a training session versus when we're pressing in a game or in a transition phase or whatever it is? I think, you could go on and on about some of the ways that we could start to kind of merge not just the GPS data on a training and match basis, but with video alongside it. I think it kind of opens up the door to be able to look at a lot of this. And then finally, working with stakeholders on our new stadium and our new training facility. And this has been certainly a learning process for me. I've never gone through new stadium or new training builds, but the first piece is really a lot of the internal stakeholders, and that's not just on the sporting side, that's on the commercial side as well, or the front office, right? So I think when it comes to the stadium, data partners that we've looked at, and there's a lot that goes into the fan experience, to business intelligence, consumer data collection. I think we've had a lot of chats with them in terms of where do we sit in that. Obviously, I think they come first, but I think there's a layer that we can tap into based on kind of the data infrastructure that they want to set up, where we can use it for benefit. And then I think with the training ground, and working with all the kind of input on workflow and what matters to certain departments, and just making sure we get some of those small details right. And then working with kind of the grounds team in terms of, things like fixed cameras on the field, or, paint lines that are, custom to some of the areas that we want to look at on the field. And then, that is working with some of the external stakeholders. Obviously there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to these builds, and a lot of different third parties that are helping through this. So, I think it's bringing the internal and the external together to make sure that, when we enter these buildings, we're not saying, oh, I wish we had chatted about that before, but, obviously trying to cover all our needs so that when we get in, we can really hit the ground running. So, still ongoing, but that's been a process, but a good one in terms of being able to actually have these conversations right now rather than when it's too late. So that's it. Try that 5 minutes, maybe. I'm not sure where we're at, but if we have time for questions, happy to answer any, but really appreciate everyone's time and, taking a listen.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Oliver. It's always difficult to present when you can't see anybody, so you did a great job. We'll open the floor up to questions. So have we got any questions in our audience?
Hi there. This is James from Fulham Football Club. I was just wondering how you've enjoyed the experience of having a blank canvas, so to speak, and I know a number of our football clubs sort of a bit steeped in tradition, and we've got some quirky old stadiums out there. I think we're fortunate enough to be building a new stand ourselves, so it's been sort of quite an exciting space for us as well, and in Nanus as well. And I'm just wondering how you've sort of enjoyed the whole process of sort of from the start.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think when I was first looking at this opportunity, I was obviously very excited for the chance to have a blank slate. It's very unique. It doesn't come around very often, but it's been very challenging. It's probably been more challenging than I think I expected. It's been awesome. It's been very fun, but I think, rather than trying to, which is equally challenging, removed entrenched traditions, setting up your own traditions and some of those pillars, is equally as daunting. So I think, we're still working through it. And I think one of the things too is it's hard to get it all right. It's hard to hit them all, especially when you're building so quickly. So I think, right now in this process, I think a lot of what we're doing is saying, what pillars would we like to stay? And then, before we get too far down the line, maybe what pillars did we maybe not get completely right, and how can we maybe reconstruct those or rebuild those, or put a Band-Aid on some of those. I think that's kind of what the process looks like right now. But I mean, listen, it's been awesome. It's been really fun, but it's been very challenging for sure.
Any more questions? I think we've got one more at the back.
Hey, Oliver. Just wondering, through the course of the day, we talk a lot about event data and tracking data. As a new team, I'm just wondering, you're bringing a new group of players together. Are there any things you can talk about that you've done to build a culture where data is sort of embraced by the players and not necessarily looked upon as a threat or, gives them anxiety or something?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, it's been a process. I think it's, and this is like the cheesy answer, but it's important too. I think, it starts at the very top, right? And I think our general manager, sporting director is very hungry for data, has made it a key piece of our culture here, right? It's embedded in kind of the way that we do things, which really helps, right? Because I think everyone follows suit from that. But then, when I think when it comes to the players and the coaches, Gary, our head coach, is very open-minded, and I've been with Gary for close to 3 years now. So, over the time, he's been very good in terms of wanting more and more. I think he's very hungry for information, and I think we've gotten to a point where I think when he's giving video sessions, right, to the players, which obviously occurs quite frequently, and like I said in the beginning, I think that's where we kind of started with data to say, listen, Gary, we can use data, for video, and it's going to help you quite a bit at the beginning. But then I think from there, the evolution is, what kind of data can we not necessarily just use as like a clipping automation, but that we can actually use to develop insights. And, it's gotten to a point where, I won't say like what it is that we're actually giving him, but, when he has video sessions and he's writing things on the whiteboard to show the players. Like there's a section, in that whiteboard that he's showing the players where it's stats, right? It's insights. And he's just listing all of the stats we've given him as a department, which has been awesome to see. I think it's awesome for him to communicate that to the players rather than us. I think it's, that's the most effective way for it to really kind of get into people's heads and ultimately, make a difference, even if it's the smallest difference, right?
Okay, have we got some questions from our online audience?
Yeah, one question, but it's the same as James.
Okay, well, I think we will wrap up there. Oliver, thank you so much for joining us, particularly online. It's great to have you.
Great. Yeah, appreciate it, everyone. Thank you.